So one of the things I wanted to look at, first of all, I think like probably most people, is that you develop interests in childhood and you sometimes don't really know where those interests come from. So my earliest interest I can remember having was in natural history in general. Now, growing up in 1970s South London, my mum and dad had a black and white TV, but I can remember being fascinated by the Jacques Cousteau undersea world. And although it was in black and white, vividly I could still imagine the colours. There's no problem with that. Around the same sort of time, I developed an interest in Native Americans. Now, I don't know whether that came from watching lots of westerns, where it came from, whether somebody bought me some toys and I just got interested. But it's one of those things I can't ever remember not being interested in them. And the same thing, being that interested in wildlife, natural history in general, being a little boy, loved picking up books about monsters, dinosaurs, things like that. So that was a little bit later, maybe about 9, 10 years old. But one of the things one of the books, the first one that came to my attention was the Bigfoot casebook. And I remember getting this out of my school library when schools really had good libraries and weren't just rows and rows of computers. And the Bigfoot casebook was great. And the one thing I really remember about it was, at the back of it is a list of chronological Bigfoot sightings from the earliest records through to the present. At that point, the book came out about 1980, so it came up to about 1980. Now, when I was reading that, I can remember being fascinated with the disproportionate number of reports and accounts that came from Native American areas and from Native American people. Now, roughly the proportions have gone up a little bit now, but at the time, Native Americans in the USA, Canada, were reckoned to number no more than 1% of the population. Now, I would have said probably, with those in the Bigfoot casebook, they probably accounted to probably around about 10% of the reported sightings. Part of that would be to do that the large Indian Native American populations are within the western side where Bigfoot is predominantly reported, but not exclusively. And one thing I wanted to add, I will use the term Native American, Indian, First Nations interchangeably. Now the reason for that being is I've spent some time, about 3-4 months, working on an Indian reservation, and if you go out there, most Native American Indian people will tell you all of these terms are made up by white people, most of them liberals, most of them, or some of them not so liberal, and all those terms are completely erroneous. They know themselves by the names of their individual nations. So that's why I'll be using the terms interchangeably. But when I was reading it, one of my favourite stories from the Bigfoot casebook came from 1976, and the picture I put up there, it came from that particular area. That's an area in Alberta, in Western Canada, and it's an area called the Bigfoot Dam. Now, the construction of that dam was taking place around 1976, and there were 3 builders at the time who were I think they were students who were doing summer work and working as construction, and they noticed this figure on a ridge, looked to be about 600-700 metres away from where they were standing, and they were fascinated by it. And they looked at it. They spent about 3/4 of an hour looking at it from that distance. They couldn't get any closer to it. Something to do with the nature of the ridge and the land as it was there. But the next day they went back there and they noticed how when one of their colleagues was there, how small that person was in comparison. That in itself triggered a load of other sort of like research into the area. And in that area were a group of Native American people who'd essentially left some of the reservations and were at that point in the mid-1970s were trying to re-establish a more traditional lifestyle in that area. Now, when these people were questioned about these creatures, they were fairly silent. They knew well about them, but they preferred not to say anything. And again, that sort of triggered something in me. So why are they not talking about this subject matter? And one of the things as well, and I'll go on to this in a bit, is something to do with the attitude towards Native Americans and probably, like, you know, the more modern non-native populations in North America in particular. Native American people will still, even to this day, have quite a live and let live attitude when it comes to nature. And two other stories in this book that I found fascinating to illustrate this, because they all happened around this time, and one of them are in the area of the Bigfoot Dam. A Native American man called Mark Yellowbird was chopping some wood on the edge of a forest one day, and he had that sixth sense which a lot of people report around Bigfoot, and he looked around and he saw from the edge of the forest, not far away from him, a great big Bigfoot creature, I reckon 10 to 12 foot, placidly looking at him. Mark Yellowbird did not know what to do, so he went back just to chopping his wood, and that was what he carried on doing, pardon the expression there. The other story, roughly about the same time, was a European American, a white American, was cutting some wood in the same sort of scenario with a chainsaw. Same sort of thing happened. This is another part of the States. But his first attitude when he turned around and saw this creature was to turn on he had an electric saw, was to turn it and held it up and almost like, you know, turn it on and to threaten the Bigfoot. I think that's very, very indicative of how two different sort of like groups of people will react to essentially the same phenomenon. And it may explain why there seems to be a lot more interaction, a disproportionate amount of interaction between native people and Bigfoot Sasquatch, whatever Bigfoot Sasquatch is, than there would be with anybody who's non-native, certainly in North America anyway. Second book I read about, again, I got this book probably in the mid-1980s. It's a book called In the Days of Victoria by Eve Ball. The picture on the, so I've trouble with left and right, on the far left of the three native people sitting there. The little boy on the bottom is a boy called James K. Wakeler. They're Apache people, and they were part of the last of the Chiricahua Apaches who were forcibly put on the reservations in the end of the 19th century. Now, in this book, James K. Wakeler talks about when some of the stories in the mythology of his people about what he was taught. And there are a couple of stories that I found really, really interesting reading at the time, thinking like, well, that sounds a bit familiar. One of the stories is I'll give you a bit of like Apache mythology here. Or their origin legend states that all Apaches were descended from somebody called White Painted Woman, or to give you her Apache name, Ishonaglashe. Now, she was known as the mother of all Apaches. Now, she had, depending on which Apache tribe you talk to, one or two sons. The main one is called Child of the Waters, again, to give him his Apache name, that's Tubagishinen. Now, he was the son of, it's a bit of sort of like Jesus and Mary sort of thing. He's the son of God as well. So, in terms of like, the Apache god was Uzen, and he came upon White Painted Woman as a shower of rain, from which began Child of the Waters, hence his name. Now, at some point, what had happened in the following mythology bears like no resemblance whatsoever to any sort of Christian mythology, but there was this creature called the Yeye. Now, the Yeye had gone around the world and killed off all of the human beings, and the only two people were left were White Painted Woman and her son, Child of the Waters. What happened one day is that the Yeye kept White Painted Woman alive because he wanted her to make more children for him to eat. And what it is, but she managed to keep Child of the Waters hidden from him. But the Yeye was suspicious. Eventually one day what happened, he came upon Child of the Waters after he killed a deer, and the Yeye said to Child of the Waters, what you eat is mine. I will kill, I will take it and kill you. And so Child of the Waters challenged him to a fight, essentially. And it's a bit like a David and Goliath sort of thing. The yaya was described as this monstrous human-like creature clad in these layers of stone, and he was uprooting pine trees that he was using as the arrows for his bow, whereas Child of the Waters was just taking up reeds, sharpened reeds from a very small bow and shooting them. Essentially, it was like, they had 7 goes each, and finally, each time the yaya shot an arrow, Child of the Waters went whoosh like that, and the tree splintered in midair. But each time Child of the Waters' arrow hit, and on the fine line, it pierced the creature's heart. That was just sort of like, it's sort of vague. I thought, well, yeah, giant monster. And it sounded a bit like one of the other sort of like more eastern US incarnations of Bigfoot, known as Stoneclap. I thought, there's some similarities there. But further on in the book, there was like reading up about that as Child of the Waters grew older, he had all of these different enemies that he had to overcome. So there was like giant deer, giant owl, giant wolf. And then there's this other one that said then there was another giant who had the appearance of a man, but yet was not a man, who was bigger than men, but not as big as the yaya. And I thought, was covered in hair and lived in this cave with his monstrous family. And I thought, oh, hang on, this is far too familiar here. This is not so. There's not a name for this creature. All it was just saying was like this name, it was called a nameless creature, but who had the appearance of a man who yet was not a man. Now, James grew up in this environment. He was sent off to one of those awful boarding schools where his hair was cut short. He was given the name James, a pretty good name, but that's what he was given. It wasn't his name, but he was given it. And so he wrote this book and put these stories down. Now, if you think of the Apaches as a people, you'll probably remember, most of you, as I do, that if you watch too much of the High Chaparral, that Apache country, as you might remember it, was like this, quite desert-like, lots of cactus, stones, things like that. Not what you'd think of like typical Bigfoot country. The reality actually was, though, that the Apache country was desert, but it was punctuated by great big mountain ranges that were covered in snow during the winter, forested, beautiful streams, good hunting country. And so they would move between the mountain ranges. The deserts were there, existed in between, but that's what it is. So Apache country was not exactly like it was in perhaps the John Ford films and the High Chaparral. And interestingly enough, you have lots of stories now, and they've been coming out for years, of one of the Bigfoot creatures called the Mogollon Monster that comes out of one of these ranges called the Mogollon Hills in Arizona. It's very much, the video is actually a group of people covered in a couple of years with masks on that represent Bigfoot, and they're doing a Bigfoot dance. The videos of that, they're doing it for tourists and that, but these things will still take place in potlatches, in longhouse ceremonies. It's still a viable part of their tradition. So looking at this, about why is that tradition so strong in the Pacific Northwest? Well, one of the reasons is it's one of the last areas where Europeans got to in North America. It's one of the last areas that had European influence. You're not talking realistically until a major influence until sort of like the mid-19th century. So it's pretty much intact by that point. Also, it's traditional Bigfoot country, mountains, deep forests, what we expect Bigfoot to be in. And I put that up there about Jerry Crew, the beginning one, not quite. There's a lot of the Bigfoot skeptics, and I more like to call them like the abject dismissers, who just like dismiss it out of hand, who will often say, oh, it all began with Jerry Crew, or the guy in the monkey suit from the Patterson-Gimlin footage. And they would say that's where Bigfoot began. Bigfoot has a longer tradition than that. It goes back, we don't know how many thousands of years within Native American tradition. It's been reported since the first Europeans arrived on the scene. There's even accounts from Leif Erikson when the Vikings arrived in North America in the 10th century of them talking about, you know, huge monsters, hairy, with big black glowing eyes living in the woods. The three pictures up here, from left to right, we have one of the commoner terms, names of Bigfoot is bukwas. And again, that's essentially means big hairy man that lives in the woods. The picture in the middle, I think, was discovered some years ago in in Oregon, in the northwest of USA. This stone head is very, very sort of like quite simian sort of features. And people are saying, like, yeah, well, what is it? You know, these people don't have any notion of monkeys, essentially, so what actually is this? And there's nothing that's been able to pinpoint it as being anything other than something relating to Bigfoot. And interestingly, the picture on the right is one of the other words for Bigfoot creatures. It's called zonkwa. And zonkwa actually translates as cannibal woman, which again is very, very interesting. You know, cannibals, if we're talking about a cannibal is a human being. Now, again, this goes into, with a lot of Native American traditions, they often describe Bigfoot as another tribe of Indians who lives out in the woods. One of the other things that's very, very common as well is that Native American people always talk about individual Bigfoot having very, very distinct personalities. Each one is different from the next. Some of them are downright cranky and can even be dangerous. Most of them will be pretty much like us, pretty inoffensive. You just leave them alone and they'll leave you alone. So there's very much like this very, very sense of like, this is what they are, this is who they are, we leave them alone, they leave us alone. And in the Pacific Northwest, traditionally, with the native tribes there, we'll go on to some of the Bigfoot traditions in other areas, a lot of the messages given to Native Americans, children particularly as they're growing up, is very, very practical messages. You don't go beyond certain points up certain valleys. You don't swim in certain rivers at certain times. Things like, if you're picked up by a Bigfoot, you don't wriggle, you just stay still, and eventually it'll probably just look at you and put you down. It's very, very practical messages. There's nothing really fearful about it, not generally. But as I said, sometimes there are some things about, you know, that comes in that, you know, because they are seen as individuals, is that sometimes they can be dangerous. One of the other things that sort of comes up is that a lot of the stuff is that Native American people will not, to this day, share everything that they know about Bigfoot or believe about Bigfoot. And the simple reason of that, if you've had 200, 300, 400, 500 years of your beliefs being ridiculed, I mentioned earlier about people being taken off to the schools and, you know, essentially, you know, going in, changing your names, forced to speak somebody else's language, everything taken away from you that made you what you were. It's almost like now, anything that you have got that's been left over, you hang on to, you know. So that's why a lot of the stuff now with perhaps is not going to be shared. We don't know, we probably never will know how much has been lost in terms of Bigfoot lore. I would say, in terms of what happened in North America, is probably the biggest single demographic collapse of a population anywhere ever in the history of the Earth, really. I think you're probably looking at, one theory says that between 1492 and 100 years later, so when Columbus sailed and arrived in the Americas, you're looking at at least a minimum of a 90% population collapse across both continents. So in excess of 100 million people down to 90 million people. Forget then all of the epidemics and then wars and everything subsequent to that. So we never really going to know what we're going to find out, which is to say why things like the Pacific Northwest are still really, really strong in terms of Bigfoot tradition. And one of the other things that we do find out of as well is that Native American people talk about Bigfoot as being both real and spirit. Now that might sound very, very new agey and that to a lot of people. And that's maybe perhaps we need to take a step backwards or sideways and look at our relationship with the universe and other people's relationship with the universe. Now, it may well be the simple fact is that, certainly when I spent some time in the US, is Native American people have a much more fluid sense of spirituality, the real world, the physical world, the ethereal world, whatever you want to call it, as being much more enmeshed in with each other. So they don't see one quite often as separate from another. All of it is completely natural to them. It doesn't feel as if it's anything very, very different. So therefore they will talk about spirits and things the way we might talk about, going to Sainsbury's. It's that every day in their life. So therefore their perception of the world and what happens in the world tends to be very, very different. So I fancy these are very, very interesting images actually about some of these things. All three of these images were drawn by Native American people. The top two were stories from the eastern states, which are really, really quite rare. Anything sort of like, when I talk about the western half of the states and the eastern, west is what I would call west of the Mississippi, and east is east of the Mississippi. So the first two, I've talked about the Haudenosaunee people, also known as the Iroquois, had these traditions of things called like the stone giants, and essentially they were like hairy, club-wielding monsters who would try and catch people and eat them. Very, very different perception of what the Western nations are. Now, when you go into the East, again, the notion of Bigfoot in the eastern states tends to be much more mythological rather than physical and contemporary. The bottom pictures was found fairly recently on the Tall River Reservation in Central California, home to the Yakuts people and some other people. And this is very much seen as, again, representations of Bigfoot-like creatures. And again, there's traditions of contemporary sightings in those areas. One of the other areas that we have a lot of contemporary Bigfoot activity outside the Pacific Northwest is southeastern Oklahoma. Now, Oklahoma was the area where, in the early to mid-19th century, where tens of thousands of Eastern Indians were relocated to Oklahoma and forced removals, often known as the Trail of Tears. And again, 5 of the tribes very, very common in this area are the Cherokee, the Muskogee, the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, and the Seminole. They have very, very sort of like entrenched communities in that area. And this is generally the landscape of southeast Oklahoma. It's very, very, not exactly mountainous, very, very choppy wooded, and very, very deciduous. It's not the Pacific raincoast of Oregon, Washington State, British Columbia, but it's still very, very heavily forested and quite remote. And interestingly, in these areas, it's actually quite close to the area just across the border. Probably some of you might have seen the film The Legend of Boggy Creek. Yeah. And that is just across the state line from there. So again, it's just part of this continuum sort of area. Now, a couple of stories about this. There's a lot of stuff goes on regularly to this day. Every year in that area there's a place called Honaby, which has an annual Bigfoot festival where people go, talk about Bigfoot presumably, share stories, and do other bits and pieces. But also there's a couple of stories from the Choctaw people from the mid-19th century that I found quite interesting. One dates from 1836, and for whatever reason at that point, a lot of the Choctaws at the time were known to be very, very tall. And there's one story of one Choctaw farmer who was awoken one night, it's 1836, by a commotion in his barn. Now this particular chap it was documented that he was over 8 foot tall. And he went into his barn one night and found something a little bit smaller than him messing around with his cows, perhaps a bit like, or in terms of, didn't seem to be bothering the cow as such, but sort of like was just around and sort of like playing with it. So the Choctaw man thought it was another Choctaw man, and just sort of, what are you doing? To which the creature turned round and thumped him on the top of the head. Now the Choctaw man thought like, there was a Choctaw game at the time where essentially two men would face each other and each bang each other on the head until the first one, whichever one fell down. And so he thought this was another Choctaw man playing a game with him. So he smacked the Bigfoot on the head. The Bigfoot fell down because he actually one of the very, very few times where Bigfoot's actually smaller than the actual human being, and howled and then jumped over him and just ran out of the barn. And it was a story then passed down in the family. The story was told by a grandson or granddaughter of the man that had happened to. And then there's another story. It's called the Bigfoot Choctaw War of 1855. It's a bit of a grandiose statement, really, but it's actually quite a scary one in some ways. There've been a lot of mischief, I think the term was used, in various farms. In the areas where the Choctaw lived, and there was things like houses were being broken into, things were being stolen, children were disappearing, and so then there's a Choctaw man called Harness Tubby, and he got together with his 6 sons, and again him and his sons were all sort of like pushing 6'6", 7 foot tall, and so they all went off on their horses one day, and they got some other volunteers for the nation, and they went around trading what they thought were bandits, to find out what's going on here. And they trailed them eventually into some woods, and Harness Tubby split his forces, and he sent one wave of horsemen into these woods to try and flush them out. There was a big commotion, there was a lot of, some screaming, rifle shots going off. Didn't know what happened. So then he went in, he still had his 6 sons with him and some of the other guys. They went in and found this scene of carnage in the woods, and in this clearing they found all these bodies of all these children in various places of decomposition, and 3 Bigfoots allegedly eating them in various ways. Now, Bigfoot's got very, very few instances where it's actually ever been accused of eating people, but this is one where we don't know. The story's coming on for 200 years old now. We don't know what survived history and that. But again, what it proves is that this association between Native Americans and Bigfoot goes back a long time. Alex Posey was a Muskogee, also known as the Creek tribe. He was a poet, journalist, and humorist, active in local politics. And this was a book I was reading just last year, actually. And it was saying, I was just flicking, but this is a good example about how I can just be reading a book about anything to do with Native Americans, and how stuff that sort of indicates something to do with Bigfoot will come up. So I'll just read it. At one quiet moment, Doc called Alex's attention to a strange whistle way out in the mountains and said it was the wood spirits. Alex wrote, "The old creeks tell of Chachana, who whips trees. He is tall, heard only at night, and seen only when the sun looks small in a mist. Whoever looks at him straightway becomes a good hunter." Now again, contemporary Bigfoot is often associated with these loud, high-pitched whistles in the woods. It's one of those things. When I read that, now I've got no other, I've tried to look up Chachana, and I can find nothing else about it. But I think the whole thing is that this whole thing, something that lives in the woods, and again, how a lot of the myths and the legends of the Eastern Indians tend to talk about Bigfoot in much more mythical terms, less sort of practical as something that's there as another part of the fauna. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through various different areas, and I've picked out a number of different areas of modern North America. that's associated on a contemporary level with Bigfoot. Now what I've done here, this one here, in this area of Northern California, and the people, the stories come from the Yurok, the Karuk, and the Hooper people. Now the area where they live is very, very close to Willow Creek, where the Patterson-Gimlin footage was filmed in 1967, October the 20th, I believe, something like that, quite near my birthday. And literally, I think the Hooper Reservation, which you can see just on there, and Willow Creek drainage is literally, I think, just over there somewhere. Very, very close. Now, the Karuk, the Hooper, and the Yurok have an ongoing tradition, relationship, whatever you want to call it, with Bigfoot. The lady on the far left there is called Lucy Thompson. Now, Lucy Thompson, that picture was taken in the early 20th century. She was one of the first Native American women ever to write a book. And the book was called, I believe, Letters to the American Indian, Reminiscences of a Yurok Woman. Now, in that book is one whole chapter devoted to, I think it's titled The Indian Devils, which is another term of, was known for Bigfoot. And this whole chapter is talking about the Yurok association with Bigfoot. Now, she had a very, very, when you read that book, it's very, very interesting. She obviously had a very, very mixed relationship, or her people had a very, very mixed relationship with Bigfoot creatures. She talks of them sometimes as devils, sometimes as creatures that live in the woods, sometimes as guardians. It's all very, very mixed. It's very, very, sort of like quite hazy. And it's interesting that she still regards them as Indians, as another tribe of people. She doesn't use terms like monsters and things like that. The two of the names there, Madu Karahat means giant in Karuk, is what they still call Bigfoot today. Oma is what the Yurok call it, and Oma is what the Hooper call it. They're very, very similar words because they're linguistically related people. But that's what their term means, boss of the mountains. For them, Bigfoot is a guardian who lives out in the woods. He doesn't generally bother the valleys and the people who live down low. That's all he does. You know, he's meant to go there and looks after the woods. Two recent books that come out, relatively recent books, one called The Hooper Project and one called Tribal Bigfoot, by a guy called David Paulides. Now, he's can be a bit controversial in certain contexts, but in some of his books, but The Hooper Project and Tribal Bigfoot, I think, are great books. Now, he works very, very closely with this man here, Harvey Pratt. Harvey Pratt is a member of the Cheyenne tribe. He's one of the Council of 44. Now, the Council of 44 is a Cheyenne tradition that has been going on for hundreds of years. The Cheyenne tribe is made up of, I think now approximately 10,000 to 15,000 people, but for years they've had this Council of 44 chiefs. Harvey Pratt is one of them, okay? He's also a trained forensic artist. He is actually, so when people report a crime and they have to, they describe the criminal, and he will draw pictures. Loads of people have been criminated and been caught on the evidence he has supplied because of his work as a forensic artist. Now, he has worked with David Paulides in this particular area on the Hooper Reservation and various other areas in the US, and talked to witnesses about what they've seen as Bigfoot. And one of the things that they found there that's come up is that these images are much more human-like than some of the other reported Bigfoot individuals that are reported. And it's quite interesting. Now, I think one of the reasons why Harvey Pratt has been so successful in doing this was the fact, in some ways, because of the legacy of history, it sometimes perhaps takes an Indian to talk to an Indian. So I think a lot of the people on the reservation were much more happy to open up to him because of his background and what he was. He was respected and professional in the modern American world, but he's also respected and highly regarded in his own native world. But essentially, in terms of what he did, I mean, they're very, very good books. They're quite expensive. But again, he did this stuff on the Hooper Reservation, talking to all these different people about what they had seen, and expanded that within tribal Bigfoot to actually find out, what was actually going on. And again, I come back to this whole thing of the live and let live attitude towards what Native American people quite have towards Bigfoot. I'm going to talk about two of the stories that appeared in, one of which has come in the Hooper Project, and one was in Tribal Bigfoot. Both with Native American women in this area. One of them, called Julianne McCovey, she was a relatively young woman. She was a fire warden, I'm not sure what they call it. When people go out into these heavily forested areas and make sure that the fire cuts are clean and everything else like that. She was checking that. So again, a professional woman, native to the area, and she got separated from her companion one day, and she was walking, but she was on the reservation, so she knew she was up in the mountains on the edge of the reservation, and she was walking around. She said she thought she could see something, sort of not far away, sort of sitting under a tree or sort of by a bush or something. And she was sort of she wasn't unduly worried about it. So she was walking sort of parallel to it, but sort of towards it. And she got there, and she was aware. She was very, very much aware that it was a female Bigfoot. She thinks it was either pregnant or possibly it was holding a small baby to her stomach. And what she said, she smiled at it, said hi in Hooper, and the creature smiled back at her, and she went on her way. As a Native American woman, she didn't scream, she wasn't worried by what she saw, she took it as sort of matter of fact. She had been brought up, this was her, she mentioned this was the first time she had ever seen Bigfoot in her life, but she also said that she grew up hearing stories about it, so it wasn't such a blind shock that it might have been to some people. So therefore, she was like, okay, I've never seen one of these before, but I've heard about them, that's what it is. And she's also been brought up with this other tradition that comes out quite a lot. If you talk to Bigfoot in your own Native American language, you're more than likely to, not necessarily to get a verbal response from it, but to get some form of acknowledgement or some sort of some sort of indecipherable acceptance from it. The other question I've got come from an old lady called Josephine Peters. Josephine, again, she was a typical fairly Bigfoot scenario. She heard a bit of a commotion outside her house one night. One of her dogs was barking, and she was thinking her dogs didn't bark, so she went outside her house to see what was going on. I think it was about dusk, because she said she could still see a creature, and she said she saw a Bigfoot walking away from her. She was about 8 foot tall, and she spoke to it in, I think Josephine was a Karuk woman. She spoke to it in Karuk, and she told it to stop and come back. And this is a woman of about 80 telling something of 8 foot tall and probably 800 pounds to actually stop and come back, which it did, and stood like the other side of the fence from her and looked at her for a minute or so, and then walked away. She went back into the house, went into her fridge, got out some food, left it over by the fence, and then went back into watching EastEnders or whatever she was watching. Again, it's just very much about this live and let live. She was the first time, she had her family members had some experiences as she was growing up, so she was aware that the creatures existed. It's sort of like, it's very unusual to see one, but they're there. They have that sort of mentality towards them. Again, some of these pictures here are Harvey Pratt's artwork again. One of the other areas that has a lot of Bigfoot activity, again, is an area called the Four Corners. Four Corners because it's in this area where 4 states, Utah, Colorado, New Mexico and Arizona come together. And interestingly, the brown areas are Native American reservations. The big one down here is the Navajo Reservation. You've got Ute reservations here and here, and here you've also got the Hickory Apache Reservation, and a little bit further down, sort of here, you've got 2 other Apache reservations. It's a very, very big Native American area of the US. Now, so big and so popular that even the Finding Bigfoot team have gone down and doing what they always do, charging around with a load of equipment and never finding very much. And I think, again, this is one of the whole things as well, about, again, some of the live and let live attitude. And this whole Four Corners area is a bit of a funny area. There's lots of things, it's got a big history of things like cattle mutilations, UFO sightings, and also things that I'm going to talk about in a minute, so probably you might have heard of, there's things like the Dogman and the Skinwalkers as well. Yeah, so one of these things were, in this particular area, is amongst the Navajo people, there's this tradition called the Skinwalkers. Now, the Skinwalkers, broadly speaking, are witches who can shapeshift. I'm not saying I believe that, that is Navajo tradition as to what a Skinwalker is. Now, Skinwalkers in the contemporary world have a very, very malign presence, but it wasn't always such. In when they were first known, again, when they were hiding from US troops, or before that, the Spanish conquistadors, the Skinwalkers actually were members of the tribe who actually helped the people. They would shapeshift into wolves, coyotes, owls, whatever it was, watch over the army troops, and then go back to their people and report what was going on. But essentially, in contemporary stuff, they're actually seen as witches who are there to cause harm to people. The picture in the middle there is the Skinwalker Ranch, an area in Utah, again on one of the Indian reservations, I think it's on the Winter Reservation in Utah, again where a lot of high strangeness has gone on. Also here, although is a picture of the rather sensationalist one of the Dogman. The Dogman is more known towards sort of like the Great Lakes area of the eastern US. Again, talking to some of the Native American people, if you do some research and stuff, you can ask them to, what's the relationship between Bigfoot, Skinwalkers, and Dogman? And they very, very much, if they have a Skinwalker Dogman tradition, they're very, very clear to differentiate between them. Bigfoot is seen as something very, very different from those. It bears no relationship. They do say one thing, so essentially a Skinwalker can change into whatever, so potentially a Skinwalker could change into a Bigfoot-style creature, but typically there's no sort of, it's not some, what's that program about all the vampires? That's it, True Blood. It's not some sort of True Blood style existence where there's all these different sort of races of creatures all vying for supremacy or anything, but it's just it's very, very different in terms of what people do. So, South Dakota and the Lakota people, known to history as the Sioux. This is the landscape of South Dakota, about as far from Bigfoot type habitat as you could get. I'm going to go on to it in a bit, but I spent 4 months living out there in 2006, and literally it's just grass in every direction, just grass, 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 hill, hill. You get a few wooded river valleys, but that's it, it's essentially grass. But it does have a very, very large Native American population. Again, that South Dakota, area-wise, it's got about the same area as England, but a population of about 700,000 people, of which about 10 to 15% are Native American. And those pinky areas are the Native American reservations. All of them are Lakota or Dakota reservations in South Dakota. Now, when it was there, I had a video, and what video won't play, but there was a video of Lakota woman, an older woman, talking about her encounters with Bigfoot. Now, I think it's quite an interesting story. She talks about how her family owned a horse, and no matter what they tried to do, they couldn't break the horse, as in terms of, like, you know, to getting ready to be ridden or anything. And she always says, she goes, we don't have that relationship with nature. If an animal does not want to do something, we don't try and force it to do anything. So they let the horse run wild. Essentially, we're going to use it as a stud horse. And apparently that's what he did, and will jump over the neighbours' fence and start studying the other neighbours' mares. So she said that creates some friction with her neighbours. A lot of the Native American reservations can be quite lawless. I've spent some time there, so it's not unusual to hear gunshots in the night. But then again, I live in Catford, and that can be sort of happen as well. But you know, it's one of those things in terms of, it was quite a lawless environment. So her horse got shot, so her and her family would go down there overnight to actually stop the neighbours from shooting over. And she was up at the main house one night, and she had these people. Some friends of hers were standing there, and she said they came running back one night. She goes, they had these wide eyes, and they were sort of like terrified. And they said, well, we were down there, and we were just out of a little camp, and then Bigfoot walked up, and Bigfoot had two big cats with him. And she said, oh yeah, that's okay, that's all right, that's fine. So like, yeah, we don't worry about that. Bigfoot's a guardian spirit. Guardian spirits often have companions. Bigfoot is there to protect women and children. He or she is a guardian spirit. South Dakota, with the Lakota people, are very much there. The notion of Bigfoot is very, very spiritual. They don't really have a tradition of a population of animals living in their environment, but Bigfoot exists as this spiritual sort of being. I don't know what that is. I've got no theories on it, but that's the perception there. It's a real part of their universe, but it's the perception is very much of a spirit rather than a real physical animal. Again, talk about reading books. The Lakota as well. One of the things I first saw in the late 1970s or early 1980s when it first came on was Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World. And on the chapter about I think man-like monsters or something like that, he talked about this spate of sightings on Little Eagle, this town on the Standing Rock Reservation, and the chap here on the left-hand side was a police officer, a native police officer, Verdell V.O., who'd taken one of the past cast of the prints. Now, what was going on at that time was quite interesting, and I'll talk about some of the names of Bigfoot in a minute amongst the Lakota people. At that point, there had been a lot of social disruption on the reservation. From the late 60s through to the mid to late 70s, there'd been a huge amount of internal violence on the reservations to do with, that had come out of the legacy of the civil rights movement, where essentially people seen as progressive tribal members and traditional tribal members have turned on each other. There was a lot of violence. I think in the space of a population of about 15,000 people, they had 200 deaths of people being shot, mostly men, but also including women and children. And the thing with, and this is actually quite documented in the book that I was reading, again about 1992 when I read it, called In the Spirit of Crazy Horse, which was, I was reading it for the political stuff at that time and the social commentary about what was going on. But actually all this stuff coming in, so it's all in about the first 50 pages, all this stuff about Bigfoot, and I think like, what's this got to do with it? So really, really quite interesting to read all about this stuff. But then you get some of the stories in there that come out about, you know, people talking about Bigfoot. Now, one of the common terms is chie, which means elder brother. That's another word for Bigfoot. It's actually seen as somebody again who's quite like a guardian, something quite spiritual, looking after people. Less savoury is the term umchegi, which means earth brown, or actually literally shit of the earth. Bigfoot is not, in that context, so Bigfoot can have a number of different roles, and actually is there when things are going wrong, he can be there to represent what's going wrong, so therefore a piece of shit, essentially, if that's what he will be. But one probably more common one is Wichashatanka, which just means big man, which is the most common term that would actually be used. Some people will use the term Sitanka, which means it's literal Bigfoot, but that's a very, very new term. It's just a translation of Bigfoot, essentially. So, in 2006, I lived on the Cheyenne River Reservation for 4 months, and I was living there working, my background's working with children and young people. That's my bread and butter work. That's what I've always done. And there's a couple of stories I want to sort of share with you when I had that. Now, I can't remember consciously ever bringing up stuff about Bigfoot, but you know, the people on the reservation, I mean, they're all very, very sort of like worldly wise, you know, sort of they're worldly wise, but they're also very, very traditional people, a lot of them, and they've had quite mixed backgrounds. So these two little girls here, and to give you some background about it, these children are the great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren of the people who kicked Custer's arse at the Battle of the Little Bighorn. You know, so this sort of, you know, this come from this tradition of being very, very sort of like, you know, these are quite confident people in spite of everything that's happened to them. They're quite sure of who they are in the world. The little girl on the left is called Ali Forebear. She looks like a naughty little girl, and she was. And the little girl next to her is called Misty Bad Warrior, who was even naughtier. Now, one day I remember sitting there with Misty, and we were reading, she used to like reading books with me, so I'd sit there, and she picked up one of those Where's Wally books, and we were sitting there reading Where's Wally, and it was one of those Where's Wally's in space, and so I was looking at it, and there's just sort of things like that. There's some Chewbacca characters walking around, and I was like, oh look, there's Bigfoot, and then she just very matter of fact, she goes, oh no, Bigfoot wouldn't be there, Bigfoot stays out in the countryside, he only comes in to scare people when they've been bad. Very much like almost like a traditional bogeyman sort of character. But again, it was that very, very matter-of-fact way she said it to me. I didn't pursue it, I just left it. A little while later, there was another little girl came in, I can't remember her name, and I was talking to her one day, and we were sitting there we were doing some artwork or something, just sitting at the table, and I said to her, oh, it must have been Monday, because I said, did you have a nice weekend? And she said, oh yeah, we had a ceremony at the weekend, and the spirits came up, and Bigfoot came up, and she was talking to me like her aunts and uncles had come over for a bit of a party. It was that matter of fact, the way she was talking to me. Now, I'm 49 years old, I've been working with kids since I've been 22, 23. I know when I'm being delivered a story, something to get for me to get their attention or something like that. This was a matter of fact conversation this little girl was coming up with. I didn't ask her. What I can say is that she came from a small community called Greengrass. Greengrass is known as the most traditional of the Lakota communities. It is the home of what's known as the Pipe Keeper. I think it's 19 generations ago, whatever, 19 times 30 years, it's a long time ago anyway. So we're looking probably like 600-700 years ago. The sacred pipe was given to White Buffalo Calf woman who preached this notion of peace amongst the Lakota, and to that day there's always been a pipe keeper. Now to this, currently, and for while I was out there, the pipe keeper resided in this community called Greengrass. So in some ways it's almost like the Bethlehem of the Lakota people, if you want to think that. I mean, it's a bit difficult to put into place because their sense of spirituality it's not that tied to geography. But anyway, that's what it would be in terms of being there. So she came from this very, very traditional, almost like the core traditional of Lakota people. But I don't know what she meant. She was a 7-year-old girl. I'm not going to question her about what she was. It wouldn't have been culturally appropriate for me to do so. One of the other stories I had was, again, with the old caretaker of the place where I live, a guy called Romy. I still write to him occasionally. Nice old fella. And he said to me, and he always used to describe himself, he goes, well, I'm not a traditional Indian. He goes, no, he goes, I don't eat buffalo. We used to get free buffalo on the reservation, so he goes, I prefer beef, and da-da-da, and he'd been a rodeo rider, and he'd been in the army, and things like that. And he was always very, very keen to point out he wasn't a traditional Indian, but he said to me once he was talking about subjects about Bigfoot, and he said, my nephew saw one in broad daylight, had one in his rifle sights one day. He said, but he said he couldn't take a shot at it. He said it looked too much like some type of man. Now again, it goes into this very much like this live and let live sort of attitude to sort of like, I'm not going to shoot something I don't know, it's not threatening me, why on earth am I going to go and shoot it? And then my last story from the reservation was, I sort of became friends with this medicine man and his wife. Now, when you think medicine man, you know, I'm not thinking like, you know, he wasn't going around with a buffalo headdress on and doing dances and things like that. He just happened to be a spiritual, fairly holy man sort of thing. And we was down at his caravan, and his wife was actually a Swiss woman. And we was there chatting with him one day, and he brought up the subject of Bigfoot, and he said, well, as far as we're concerned, Bigfoot's a shapeshifter. He might be in this room, could be a fly sitting on the wall there, we don't know what he is. He said to me, he goes, I saw Bigfoot once down in the river bottoms where I lived, and that was it. Again, it's a very, very matter-of-fact part of the existence. Coming towards the end of the talk now, in terms of where we're going from here, one of the books I really, really like, and if anybody's really interested, I would say to read it, is a book called The Locals by Tom Powell. And Tom Powell had worked for the Bigfoot Field Researchers organisation. I think he was a trustee at some point. But I think he got a bit disillusioned with them because he found that they kept throwing out anything that didn't fit their pre-ideas about what Bigfoot was. They kept putting to one side. And he said he didn't think he was a science teacher, and he thought that was bad practice to do that. He said you look at all of your evidence and see it. And because of that, he accumulated some of the stories that the BFRO had put to one side. There was a thing, I think it happened in 1999, but there was what they call a range fire in northern Nevada. Now again, southern Nevada, Las Vegas, desert, but the northern state is punctuated by these high forested mountain ranges. And this is the area there called Battle Mountain. This was a fire that was recorded there at that time. Something like about 70,000 acres were on fire, you know, a huge amount of areas. And all the firefighters were in it. The story was that a creature was seen moving around on all fours, obviously injured, had come out of these burning woods and was surrounded by these firefighters. Now, this guy had made this anonymous report to the BFRO that Tom Powell picked up and said that it came out, it realised it was surrounded, it didn't show any form of aggression, it almost just sort of like surrendered there and then. So, but it was walking on all fours, but like an ape, not like a bear. Essentially, it was given medical treatment by both a vet and a doctor. And he was the guy who reported it was asked all these other questions by Tom Powell, and he said the interesting thing that I found about this report was that the creature seemed to respond mostly to the care shown to it by a young Native American woman who was part of the healthcare team. The other thing was that the Native American woman showed no fear about it. She went straight up to the creature as soon as she saw it, which to my mind probably indicates that she knew something, I had something in her background that told her that these creatures were there and in existence. You know, I would imagine most people faced with a 7.5 foot sort of man, sort of gorilla-like looking thing might be a little bit nervous. But the fact that this woman apparently wasn't nervous and went straight up to it, I think speaks volumes. And I think for me, as a bit of a conclusion from that, I mean, there was some stories about some follow-up, like what happened. There was various conspiracy theories coming. Everybody was told by, various men in black, don't report this, you're going to lose your pension, you're going to lose your job if this goes public, and things like that. But I think for me, the thing is, I've been fascinated by the whole Bigfoot, Almasty, Yowie thing since I was 10, 11 years old. That's near enough 40 years ago now. To my mind, particularly with the American Bigfoot, we don't seem to be any closer to coming to any resolution as to what this mystery actually is. I always quite often say to people, I feel more, not uncomfortable, not uneasy, just more unsure of actually giving any theory now to what Bigfoot actually is than what I did, say, 10, 20 years ago. And, and I said I freely admit, I'm an armchair researcher, I've never been out in the field, I can't say too much at all. But I think sometimes that, maybe if we are going to get an answer to this, then perhaps we might need to look at a different tack. We can't go looking at the getting loads more boys' toys and running around the woods in camouflage and pretending we're all tough to think like, we're going to trip up this dumb ape at some point. It's not going to happen. If it would have happened, it would have happened within the last 50 years and it hasn't done. So I think it may well be that we may just have to get any sense of what this phenomena is actually perhaps talk, if they'll talk to us, to the Native American people. I think that will be my final word on the matter. Sorry about the films, but thank you. Anybody got any questions? Yep.
How do the Native Americans view white man's pursuit of Bigfoot?
I think they don't seem to be overly worried by it. They think it's fairly futile. I don't think... I know in Florida we look at skunk ape and the Seminoles think like, they quite often say you can take a shot at one of these things, but it's not going to cause it any harm. It depends where you go, but they don't generally think anything of it really. I heard the story of two Native American old ladies who found the whole thing really quite hilarious about all these guys running around the woods in camo, thinking that they were, with all these range of electronic gadgets, thinking that they were going to crack the mystery, and they just found it ridiculous. I mean, they don't think Bigfoot's in any real danger or anything.
It's interesting. When I come into the airports like Canada and America, they always ask you the question, why are you here? I have to admit, I'm hunting Bigfoot. And the white guys just go, hey Bob, she's hunting Bigfoot. And they just take the piss. That was one of the responses I first got. The First Nation people, I go, I'm here to look for Bigfoot. Oh yeah, okay. And I said, do you believe in it? Oh yeah, we believe in it. And this one woman, I said, she's, oh yeah. And I said, oh, you're not taking the piss, because most of you take the piss. And I said, and she goes, oh, just look me straight in the eye, and she goes, oh, I know it exists. Completely cool. Like, no, sort of, just like a normal thing. It was quite interesting. Just get that sort of difference in response.
Yeah, exactly. One being on the reservation, it was just like people were just like, yeah. It's just like, there was no real questions about it at all. Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks very much.